Bueno, pues buenos días, agradecemos la presencia de todos ustedes el día de hoy. Vamos a inaugurar con la sesión del doctor Martin Kenney, el Seminario Permanente del Departamento de Estudios Sociales. Antes de introducir al doctor Kenney señalando algunos aspectos de su currículum, quiero también dar la bienvenida a quienes nos acompañan por internet. Se van a poder hacer preguntas por esta vía, nos las van a hacer llegar. Entonces, sin más, quisiera comentarles que el doctor Martin Kenney forma parte de la Universidad de California en Davis. Él tiene una maestría en sociología y tiene un doctorado en sociología del desarrollo por la Universidad de Cornell. Voy a resaltar solamente dos aspectos que me parecen muy relevantes, ya que el currículum del doctor Kenney es muy amplio, es una persona muy reconocida. Quiero señalar que está con nosotros de enero a junio haciendo una estancia en el Departamento de Estudios Sociales. Él también estuvo como visiting scholar en el Asia Pacific Research Center de la Universidad de Stanford. También en el año 2000 hizo una estancia en la Universidad de Cambridge, y señalaría dos de sus últimos libros, el de 2004 junto con Richard Florida, que se llamó Locating Global Advantage, Industry Dynamics in the International Economy, y otro que es solo del Dr. Kenney, que es Understanding Silicon Valley, Anatomy of an Entrepreneurial Region, también por la Stanford University Press. We are very happy that you stay with us. You have 40 minutes for your conference, and then we have a dialogue between us, maybe two times questions. Good.
Thank you
Welcome.
very much, Araceli. Well, thank Jorge, Oscar, Alfredo, people that I've known a few years, shall we say. We don't say old friends, longtime friends nowadays. As I get older, I try to not talk about old anymore, but say longtime friends. Okay, so some of you may know me, some of you may not. Most of my work in the last decade has really been head down, deep data. Yep. Oh, okay. Sorry. I've got a professor's voice, so I don't need these things, but
we are connected with the
okay.
by internet.
Okay. To the National Security Agency, right, in Washington, direct connection. Okay. So most of you have known me over the years. I'm pretty head down in the data, but Oscar said he'd like me to make a set of presentations here. So this is one of the things that I've been thinking about, which I think is a bigger question than I usually deal with, and it's really, we're not only in the era of the internet anymore, we're in the era of the smartphone, which means that within 2 to 3 years, there will be 3 to 4 billion people connected to the internet globally. So we're going into a completely new age. And this is to try to think about that. And I'm just now trying to think about how to put this together into a coherent article. So this is the first time I've really presented this, and please make comments, criticisms, because I need to think through this. It's still confused in my mind what's really going on here. So let me start. Let's start with Marx. We should always start with Karl. Uncle Karl saw a lot of things. So I'm just taking this out of the poverty of philosophy. Social relations are closely bound up with productive forces. In acquiring new productive forces, people, we don't use men anymore, change their mode of production, and in changing their mode of production, in changing the way of earning their living, They change all their social relations. The hand mill gives you society with the feudal lord, the steam mill society with the industrial capitalist. The same men who establish their social relations in conformity with the material productivity produce their principles, ideas, and categories in conformity with their social relations. Now, let's not get into the debate about whether Marx was a social determinist, which you could read from the hand mill and the feudal lord. But let's accept, or let's play with the idea that the productive forces are changing dramatically and they're going to change the social relations. Or maybe it's the social relations and them evolving dialectically. Let's not have that debate here. But let's think about what all this stuff might mean for the future. So what do we know? We know the digital technologies. Moore's law, which is basically microprocessors becoming more and more capable on less and less space on silicon. So we went from mainframes to mini computers. Those of us older will remember that process, to PCs, to, if you want, laptops, to smartphones, to smartwatches, to wearable computing, Google Glasses, right? All becoming possible. I mean, the technology is taking us that way. Cloud computing, the data explosion, right? It went from gigabytes, megabytes, to gigabytes, to terabytes, to today Google collects, 9, 10, 15 petabytes of data a day, right? And we're going to Google data, whatever it is beyond petabytes, more and more zeros as data. We collect more and more data, and we sift through that data. So the NSA can sift through all phone calls, all the time, everywhere. We're going to the Internet of Things, where all of these things around us will have microprocessors. Your thermostat will have a microprocessor in it that will be sensing what you're doing, right? So more and more sensors. So data is going to be collected. The Google car, right? The Google car that can drive around without a driver. Maybe not yet quite there, but in 5 years, 10 years, certainly there, right? Increasingly, Google's going into shopping centers, buildings, and photographing everything. So if I need to know how to get from here to Oscar's office, I just look at my smartphone. I don't need to ask anybody. Up 3 floors, down 2, et cetera, et cetera. And this is all coming. New platforms, we all know the old platform, Amazon, eBay, and Google. And this is 15 years old. These are old platforms now. Facebook, Twitter, LinkedIn, Airbnb, Uber, and all of the other proliferation of stuff. Robotization, 3D printing, manufacturing, et cetera, et cetera. Drones to deliver the mail. Why have a person deliver the mail when a drone machine will be able to deliver the mail to your home, right? No problems with people, et cetera. Why not? I mean, I don't know. But all of this stuff is coming on the horizon, right? It's right over the horizon now. How it'll get actualized, we don't know. But the implications are really quite powerful. I mean, why have work done in China when you can 3D print in your house? And these are all, this is all kind of the future, and we don't know what the future will be, and a lot of this will end up being never happening. But think about just what has happened in the last 15 years. I mean, I could ask you, raise your hand, how many use Google Scholar? I mean, Google Scholar is everywhere now instead of going to the library or something else, right? Just use Google Scholar. You Google it on Google Scholar, on some keywords, etc. Facebook, Twitter, all of these. Okay. So what's new and what should we anticipate for labor? The cyber panopticon, right? Jeremy Bentham's panopticon that follows through in literature. The cyber panopticon, it's almost here. How many of you carry a smartphone? How many carry a smartphone here? Okay, not all of you, most of you. Okay, so therefore, if it's an Android or if an iOS, Apple or Google know where you are at all times, right? So does the US government, but so does the Mexican government, probably, right?
Chinese too.
And the Chinese perhaps, but so the cyber panopticon, it's here. Then that gets merged with your credit card data, with your automobile. If any of you have a car that's my car is 1995, so I'm still out of it, and I don't carry a smartphone. So, but your car is a mobile sensor, and it's also telling the NSA and whoever wants to know where you are. That's why the battle for the car is going to be so important. I mean, that's the next step, right? So the cyber panopticon is coming about. The ability to characterize nearly everything physical digitally and then automate it. That's on its way, right? We know that's coming. Replace much white-collar work that can be characterized and automated with data processing, with big data. Right? It doesn't have to think like artificial intelligence like us. What it does now is it can give the answers just by analyzing masses of data, right? Deep Blue beats the American, the world, and he's a Russian chess player. Okay? Connect 70 to 80% of the world population. And then in all of this world, it appears as though the platform, who owns the platform has the power. We'll discuss platforms a little more, but who owns the platform? Facebook is a platform. Google's a platform. Microsoft, of course, was a platform, right? The PC was the Microsoft platform. So we're going into a world where these digital platforms are going to become so important, and who controls them is going to be able to extract value in the global economy. Right? Facebook's got 400, 500 million users. LinkedIn, I mean, in the United States, anybody who's in the marketing world is on LinkedIn, right? You just have to be on LinkedIn. But I have to be on LinkedIn, though I don't actually ask anyone to join. I have people asking me, and if it's my students, I accept. So these platforms are power. Let's see if that's okay. So labor, more globally biddable than ever. That's for sure. Labor is more globally biddable than ever. So you have an American sewing, you have a Mexican sewing, you have a Chinese sewing, and you have a Sri Lankan sewing, doing sewing. That's a globally biddable job. Now, there's geographic aspects to it. Are you closer to the market? Because you do have to move atoms still. But these are all calculable. Everything is calculatable now. The supply chain is more and more transparent. Any of you who study supply chains know this, right? Supply chains are more and more transparent. They're digitally transparent. They're transparent because increasingly every product in the supply chain, the shirt, will have a chip reporting to the supply chain. Where is the shirt? Right? It used to be the cargo container, then it's the box. The way the price of this stuff is going down, it's going to be that granular, okay? So the work then becomes more globally biddable. Micro work. I don't know if you've been watching The Mechanical Turk, Amazon. Micro work. You can get on and do little bits of work in your free time and get paid micro payments. I will look a little bit at that. But micro work, so you can divide tasks. Tasks could never be done before because you can do it online, right? Filling out forms or something like that. It's possible to put it online and for Amazon to capture a little bit of that. Just a micro payment, but if you can move a lot of work, enormous amounts of work online, lots and lots of micro payments all of a sudden become real money. Formal work, and we're seeing this in the United States, becoming informalized, becoming contingent, right? Becoming a contractor, right? So that we know is going on. Informal work is becoming cyber formalized. I'll talk about that in a minute. Creative, as my friend Rich Florida always talks about the creative class, this is not just old art, right? If you see in San Francisco now the fights around the Google bus, right? Rich Florida calls it a creative class. It's the artists pissed off because the Google technologists are driving them out of San Francisco. So if it's a creative class, that's interesting class. Well, classes do fight each other. But it's not really about old art. Most of the creativity that we're talking about is somehow related to the online piece. Or at least that's my hypothesis. And I'd like to, get reactions because I don't know I'm right. I'm just sort of trying to put these stylized maybe facts up to get your reactions. It's capital. Capital is another interesting thing. It's more available and aggregatable than ever. So you have Angels List. All of you know Angels List? Okay. So everybody knows Angels List?
No.
Okay. So Angels List is an online venture capital raising platform. It's a platform. Right? So you, Alfredo, have a project, a firm that you'd like to start. You could go to Angels List and put this online and ask people to help fund you. Now, there's a set of rules. This is only in the United States right now. It's probably in Europe, but I'll talk just about the US, which I understand very quickly. You have to be a certified investor. So you have to have $200,000 a year in income and $1 million in assets to be able to use Angels List. Okay? And you actually have to, in this particular case, you have to actually go meet the entrepreneur, meet with the investor to create some sort of personal connection there. But it's all facilitated by you putting your project online. And there being certified investors that also are online. And the matching is going through Angels List. We all know Kickstarter, everybody knows, right? So Kickstarter is another way of mobilizing capital. Again, this is not for commercial projects, more for artistic, as you know, but it's a way of mobilizing capital that never before could be mobilized in that way. Right, so we use, if you think of the history of capitalism, there's the individual, there's the development of banks who aggregate capital and then loan it, etc. And now we have these online platforms. I just listed two of the most salient. There's Indiegogo, which is another one. And there are many others, these kinds of platforms coming on. They're facilitating this through online, facilitating the aggregation of capital in ways that could never have been aggregated before. Okay. We all know capital is more mobile than ever. So that's not new, but it's interesting. The other thing that I think is going on here when we think about the internet space and platforms is that they tend to be winner-take-all economies. Right? So there are many Facebooks, and then there's a Facebook. There was search before Google, and now there's Google. I mean, there's still Microsoft kind of somewhere out there trying to compete. What is the Microsoft platform? I don't you see. It's, yeah, well, we don't even know, but I mean, what? Bing. Of course, how could you forget Bing Crosby? Microsoft is about as old as Bing Crosby in this world. Bing is dead, and Microsoft's not yet. But isn't that interesting? That's winner take all. So many of these economies appear to be quite winner take all. Right? So if you think about the old auto industry, I mean the United States, just think about the United States. We had GM, Ford, and Chrysler. Now Chrysler's kind of gone, but if you look at the history of the auto industry and how it shook out, at the end there were three. There was Studebaker, there were Packard, and it came down to three, but it wasn't clearly such a winner-take-all economies, right? Mm-hmm. But on the internet, so much of this stuff is winner-take-all. If you don't use LinkedIn, what do you use on the internet? You can't even think of it, right? Winner take all. LinkedIn's got the whole thing. So what happens in an environment where winner take all becomes more important? And winner take all becomes actualized not in wages but in capital gains. Capital gains is a very different kind of income than wages. right? So what does that mean? And then, of course, if it's control of platforms, then capital can be, would be in the form increasingly of platforms. Now, I'm making a lot of big generalizations. There'll be whole sectors that this won't be as important in. But many of those sectors now are no longer leading edge sectors. And automobiles is no longer a leading edge sector. Textiles and garments is no longer a leading edge sector, right? So that's sort of another piece of this that I don't quite understand, but I think is really pretty interesting. Okay, so I'll just go through some of this stuff and then I'll be pretty much done. Okay, so we all know the first wave, the Amazon wave. Everybody uses Amazon. eBay, which aggregated the swap meet and the garage sale, right, and moved it online. Okay. Big business, big money there. And then Craigslist, which is not private, but is, of course, the classified ads. I mean, there are no more classified ads anymore in the United States. I mean, there's some, but not many. Craigslist moved a piece of that. The jobs wanted went to Monster, Monster.com, and a set of jobs wanted kinds of sites. Monster's sort of the big winner there. I mean, the winner take all. So that's sort of the first wave. Here's sort of the second wave. How far will it go? Nobody knows, right? I certainly can't see the future. But the venture capitalists have been betting a lot of money on this. So here's Mechanical Turk, micro labor, right? So kind of really interesting site. Y'all should go look at it just to understand what they're trying to do. It's growing. How much it's growing is a little hard to say. But we have Odesk, which is you put a technical job online, and then anyone in the world can bid on that job. India, Mexico, Antarctica, Mars, wherever, right? Can bid on the job, and then you choose them. And well, I'll get into it a little later, but there's evaluation systems, right? You rate them, they rate you, et cetera, et cetera. So, and it's all online. It's all online. Online trust. I'll talk a little bit more about that in the next one. This is Airbnb. So I decided I would come stay in Tijuana for a couple days. So I looked around to see who's on Airbnb. And there's not a lot in Tijuana. There's far more in San Francisco, San Diego. Those are all dots of people who are offering a room for me. I guess in Rosarito, which is understandable. It's a tourist spot. You want to get cheaper than a hotel. Well, you could stay on someone's beach place for the day or for whatever, right? Now, what's interesting about Airbnb, I mean, this is in itself interesting. And who wins this is going to put hotels in a big squeeze, right? And there's a lot of issues around regulation, unionization in hotels, and how Airbnb may go around that, which is really quite fascinating micro labor issues and micro capitalist issues. Hotels versus Airbnb. Will the hotel industry buy it? Will regulatory, right? Hotels and motels in Mexico, as in the United States, all around the world are actually regulated, right? I mean, if you get robbed in a Mexican hotel and it looks, the police would probably come in and be involved in the United States, they surely would be, right? If you're robbed by hotel employees, or if the hotel was systematically robbing guests, the Mexican government would eventually have to come in and say, this can't go on, right? Not with Airbnb. But there's different ways of regulating. There's the cross-evaluation, but also Airbnb looks at crime records, which in the United States are online. So you're offering, or someone who wants to take a hotel room, they can look at your crime records online. They can look at your credit on both sides, which is a good indicator, right? People who have good credit good credit paying regularly, et cetera, tend to be, quotes, good people, good customers. I'm putting all in quotes, but you get what I'm saying. That's all online. Now, so the trust is being evaluated by the platform. Should you be trusted? Shouldn't you be trusted? Both as a person coming to the room and as a person renting the room. Right? How far this will go, I don't know, but it's growing very quickly. This company now has a $2 billion valuation. If it went public, it'd go public probably $2, $3, $4 billion. Capital gains for control of the platform. Right? And there's 100, 200 employees here. They will share that money. The rest of us, too bad unless we get it back in taxes. Monetize your car and you as a driver, the Uber, right? I don't know if Uber's in Tijuana, but Uber's become quite successful in big cities. People use Uber instead of having a car, right? With your smartphone, you order Uber. All the payment, you don't pay the driver, so you don't need any cash when you get into that cab. It's not a cab, it's a car, right? And the car driver doesn't need to hold any cash, so that potential nexus of conflict is gone. You pay through the app, through your credit card. Once again, trust. I know the driver, and I know you. I know your credit card. I know your criminal record. It's all online. I can look at you and say, would I put Oscar in that cab? Yeah, he's a big guy, I know he is, so put him in there anyway. No, but you get the pit. Or would I get in the cab with Oscar? No. but you see, now I know. I've never seen Oscar, but I have his profile, right? So this internet-based trust is very different than the trust of a cab, right? A cab is almost like a unionized job too, that the government regulates, etc. So we're having private regulation, in a sense. Is it better or worse? I don't know, but this will destroy the cab unless something's done about this in a bidding war, eventually. That would be my hypothesis. Okay. Oh, the other thing I should come down. This is Lyft. Here you monetize your car. You have a car that you're not using. You put it on Lyft. How much will you, what is the day rental? With your smartphone, there's a smartphone lock on the car. You unlock the car with you're given a code. And you can get in the car, unlock, drive it, bring it back, right? This allows you, us, people who have a consumer durable, as a room is not a consumer durable, but it's a slack asset on the consumption side of the balance sheet that's now being monetized. Right? The hotel is a capital asset. Your room, an extra room, Oscar has an extra room that you want to monetize. Was not on the capital side of the social balance sheet. It was on the consumption side of the social balance sheet. It's now been placed over on the capital side for some period of time, as has been your car. This is really interesting because it's going to take the capital assets of society. It's going to start reshaking some that were consumer assets and moving them onto that side of the balance sheet. So it's going to play a lot of games with what we think of as GDP. It's going to be a lot of games with what we think of as assets. And it's playing games with what is labor and slack time, like micro labor. So these are just a few of these kind of straws in the wind that make me think that we need to start rethinking what is labor going to be, and perhaps what is capital going to be. So I just want to go through a few other things here, and then I'm done, basically. Are these going to be winner-take-all economies that are actualized in capital gains? I just want to take out the crony finance government transfers to the wealthy, because there's lots of other things going on, right? We know the corruption on Wall Street and all that. So even if I take all that out, which is, of course, driving a winner-take-all income inequality, I think these technologies may also be pushing us in this way. So does the entrepreneurial economy reinforce income inequality? Right? So if Uber's worth $2 billion and 200 people are at Uber, and they get that $2 billion for what they created in 5 years, that's going to create income inequality, right? Because that's going to be capital gains, not even wages.
Is that the value of the company?
So right now, the guess about the value of Uber is about $1 billion to $2 billion. Airbnb is about $2 billion. I remember Google, it was started in 2004, and Google's, I don't know, you'd have to look it up, worth $300 billion. And that accrued to a relative, Google, even if you add the Motorola, if you take the Motorola acquisition out, Google's about 20,000 people. Total. That's Google. Now, in the ecosystem around Google, there's lots of other people making money, but they're usually contingent, right? And Facebook is worth, I don't know, some wild number, right? And Facebook is much younger than Google's, right? Now, around Facebook, there's other parts of that ecosystem, but they're more contingent. But if you're in Facebook right now, you've got a very, very good job. So, and it's just that small group, and then around it is all this contingent labor, right? Or Google with Android, right? Who's writing apps? Some people made a lot of money writing apps, but the rest of them are contingent labor. You can see it's a long tail. A few people making very large, it's the other way. It depends on how you have the axis. But a lot of people making no money off Android or iOS. And a few people doing really well, right? But all contingent. So another question one might ask from the American perspective is, do the new firms create the same number of highly paid employees as earlier new firms? Because I study the venture capital industry a lot. Intel created a lot of very well-paid jobs. It had manufacturing within it, right? Versus Google, relatively speaking, far less well-paid jobs. So how do we think about that? So and the idea is create the platform and create an ecosystem around your platform, but the ecosystem around your platform is more and more contingent labor, right? Writing apps. Right? Most people write apps and never make any money off it, but they're adding to the iOS ecosystem and platform, right? So building ecosystems is really important. If we think about going back to a previous industrial transformation, the rise of mass production, General Motors, around it we're creating an ecosystem of parts suppliers that were paid relatively well, and the largest ones actually became unionized. Right? This ecosystem, I think, looks different. Now we're in the early stages. What will politics, what will social movements effect be on how that ultimately gets organized? That's unclear. So we're taking this snapshot. We can see the trajectory in the early phases, let's say from the start of the internet if you want, 1994, 95. We're now 20 years into this. And we've seen a whole set of transformations. But it's hard to see what all that means. Okay, so work is being transformed. I think we can agree with that. Should we be thinking about new classes or class fractions, right? My friend Rich Florida says there's a creative class out there. I never believed it, but he's on to something. Alan Scott, we were at a thing in DC 2-3 weeks ago, and he calls it the cognitive creative class, or creative cognitive class. I can't remember. I think he's kind of handsome. Maybe he wants to look like Rich Florida also, and be rich like Rich. How much of this is driven just by financialization? Because we certainly are in that, and not real changes. What is the role of globalization and all these other forces that are going on simultaneously that certainly the technology is facilitating, but it may not just be the technology. So that I'm unclear on. I don't know how to pull all these threads apart and see which ones are related to the phenomenon I'm interested in, which ones are happening anyway for some other reasons that I can't see. So that's sort of the questions I pose to you that I don't have any answers for. So that's it.
Gracias, vamos a dar un aplauso. Thank you, Dr. Kenney. podríamos decir que tu smartphone, tu gran aliado, que en estos días todo es inteligente, desde cómo pagas, cómo ubicas lugares, hasta la forma en que dices hola. Bueno, estas son parte de las cosas que nos hace repensar el doctor Kenney con esta presentación. Entonces abriremos el espacio para las preguntas y las respuestas. Si las pueden hacer en inglés, por favor, háganlo para que el doctor Kenney las pueda contestar. Y vamos a hacer una primer ronda. Le vamos a dar la palabra al doctor Kenney y si hay más preguntas, hacemos una segunda ronda.
Comenta que si alguien prefiere hacerlo en español,
sí, si alguien quiere hacer la pregunta y no lo puede hacer en inglés, la doctora Lorena Pérez nos hará la traducción de su pregunta. Entonces,
Can I also say, as the questions, if you have reactions to the question, why don't you also help answer them? Because, like I said, I just don't understand the phenomenon, so I want to get as much out of your thinking as possible.
Que si alguien tiene una reacción a las preguntas de los colegas, se sientan en libertad de comentar, porque él quiere sacar ideas de esta sesión.
Pues más bien
cuando las preguntas en español.
I will also translate for you. That's what Oscar is saying.
A ver, por favor, Enrique.
Bueno,
Si
va a ser en español.
De todos modos, si te acercas el micrófono porque está por internet.
Buenos días, Enrique Soto del Doctorado, aquí del Colef. Mi pregunta es si esta tendencia hacia un trabajo atípico como este que se da desde cualquier espacio en una computadora, donde se puede uno conectar a cualquier parte del mundo, implica también que el carácter idiosincrático del trabajo se está perdiendo.
Let me see if I can recall. His name is Enrique Soto, PhD student. He's asking if this type of job that's emerging from computer and in information technology has implications for ideology.
No, cultural aspects of the work.
Idiosyncrasy has implications for idiosyncrasy.
You can answer, or we can finish the 3 or 4 question more.
Whichever way you'd like to go.
Okay.
Okay. Alfredo, please.
I will make my question in English.
Can you
I will
put
ask,
your...
I will ask Lorena to translate my English to English, to real English. Well, there are a lot of things that one can imagine when one thinks in your questions. And there is very suggestive work. I think in first sight, your question could be encuadrada, enmarcada,
Framed.
referred to the old discussions in sociology of work about the skilling of work, Braverman, etc., all the classics. So I think the challenge here is how to overcome these old discussion, debates, etc., about this skilling, because what you're suggesting is new technologies. What are they doing is the skill a lot of people making poor or more precarious work, and the earnings are concentrated in small groups of people. No? So I think it could be useful thinking in the classic debates and trying to overcome those debates in some way that I don't know how. Lorena, ¿qué?
No, estuvo bien. Very good, Alfredo.
Thank you. Two more questions, Jorge and Alina.
I am Martin. I'm well, as you know, I'm working
Can
on
you
multinationals.
close
I'm
your-
working on multinationals. So my question is the future of multinationals with this new era, because as far as I understand, most of these companies start like some of them like garage business, and of course it's a huge expansion of this different type of business by household or whatever small and medium company. But again, more and more companies are getting bigger and bigger, very strong. So the function of the multinational maybe change, but still, this is my hypothesis, is still so important in order to understand globalization, etc. And last question is about Huawei. What's your opinion? Because I'm not sure if it's platform. They are controlling the platform, but they are controlling la nube, the cloud.
The cloud.
So, or at least there are some discussion on that. So, I want your opinion.
Alina, can you close because we need.
Well, she gets here. I'll react to Jorge's comment. And it has to do with a question I have. It would seem to me that the people who own the technology, and it's not Mexicans or Argentinians or anyone in this south of the border, are the ones developing this very puzzling and very lucrative technologies. So I don't see much future for Jorge's multinationals. So I would like your reaction. I would like your reaction on that. I mean, it seems like true imperialism. I mean, the ones who own the information, it's like owning the nuclear bomb, and you're the only one that, the only country that has it. So what does that make for the rest of the world? And just as Alfredo was suggesting, what is the implication from sociological perspective? I'm thinking of work psychology, that's where I'm coming from, and how these technologies are affecting self-sustaining communities. Countries that are self-sustaining in terms of their livelihood, their food, and so on. Places like Argentina, where although the economy is crappy, still they have food, they have shelter. They are basically a self-sustaining country. And still, things like booking and reviews by booking, it really shapes the way that they work. And it's something from the US. So I'm interested in your reaction, how really these technologies are shaping work.
Okay, Alina was first. Please.
Thank you. Good morning, Dr. Kenney. It's two things. I would like to ask you to speak a little bit more of this idea of the informal labor becomes cyber-formalized. And the other thing is a brief comment. Mr. Alfredo already said about these are new and precarious jobs, and this is what I would like you and us to talk about. You began speaking about Marx and the workers he was talking about or writing about needed to create a revolution because they had to fight for rights and for shorter shifts and resting time, etc. And these new employees that this internet era is creating are also precarious because they don't have social security, they don't have any other kind of things, vacations, anything. And they have been, this internet era has been creating these employees from some years ago till now. And they are not getting any of this prestaciones. I don't know how to, social benefits, but any kind of them. any security that they will be employed in 2 years from now, 1 year from now, 10 years from now. This kind of thing I would like to talk about.
Thank you, Alina. To finish this round, I want to put on the table the communities. I think many things when I read your paper, but one thing that I think was about if these platforms can really to make new communities, because when you talk about the projects that you can put online and you never see face-to-face to investors and never stay in contact, direct in contact with the other people in this virtual community, we think real in communities about in this time and in this form to be a new business like you are discussing with us. And this is the third time of their conversation. Please, Dr. Kenney.
Wow. So let me just go down.
Can you close the microphone,
Oh,
please?
sorry. Let me go down the list. So the cultural issues. So interestingly enough, most of the research in this area is actually from the cultural studies media folks. But they usually don't think about work, and they don't think about it in the kinds of terms that I think we as social scientists might rephrase it, though they all come from a Marxist perspective. They actually don't look at ownership, control, power, usually, except in some sort of more vague ways. So the culture. So there's a great deal of cultural issues along here, and how we think about culture and society is clearly changing. I mean, how long have we been talking in the social sciences about networks? No, not really.
50 years?
30 years. Really, the network stuff is 20, 30 years old. We've always talked kind of about networks, but not in the way we talk about them now. There's, map the networks, right? Collect, do PIAC, right? UCI, whatever, right? Map networks, understand networks. The network stuff was like Barry, what's his name, at Wellman at Toronto. And it really wasn't really very big, except the last 25 years has become really something where we try to map them and understand the networks. I mean, talking about going to networking events. This is really about 20 years old. In the United States, and Mexico may be much older here. But to talk about networking in that way, this is really, I remember when this stuff started, because I've been following the industry, the venture capital financing, who's doing what, networking events, first Mondays, last Fridays, all this kind of stuff. This is 20 years old. I would argue it's already changing the way we think about society and culture. And we just haven't seen it. It's just sort of evolved. Right? In sociology now, networking is huge. Everybody's mapping networks. 20 years ago, that was, this is when Woody Powell and a few people like that started getting. Remember, Woody Powell's earliest work, wasn't it? It was the iron cage, right? And isomorphism. That wasn't networks. Right, so you can look back at the history of sociology. I'm not saying that people didn't understand that there were networks and there were families and all of that, but conceptualizing it that way, it's just what Marx said. The ruling ideas, the way we think about production, etc., start to affect our ideas. So I think it's a great question. It's not the question that I'm really interested in, but it's an observation that I think has some value in it, but I don't know how far empirically the studies of this have gone. But I think it is affecting how we think culturally, how we interact. And in my lifetime, I'm sure that that's happened in the social sciences that I'm familiar with. Okay, the de-skilling and reskilling. There's something there in the Braverman and then the sort of Paul Adler and the critiques of Braverman saying that if we think of skills as Marx would have, as the society's skills, there's de-skilling, reskilling, upskilling going on at the same time. So the folks inside Google have incredible skills, right? And they're workers. No, they've been given capital gains, so they have a piece of the capitalist pie, which is stock options, which the stock options really was developed first in Silicon Valley for all the workers inside the organization, which is to hook them with capital gains. So there's clearly something there, but my guess is if we think about the society as a whole, then the Braverman argument is just not right.
So that's why I say overcome the
Right.
debate.
Right. So I think that debate is gone, but it's still an important thing for me to think about as I'm trying to think through this, to keep that debate in mind. Okay. Precarious work. I mean, this is really interesting. So we have precarious work. We have Luis Guarnizo and people in my unit, my department, who look at migrant workers on the street, which is truly precarious work in the United States. And then we have the Gideon Kunda and that work on software professionals at the very high end who wanted to be precarious, want to do different projects, they don't want to sit inside a company, right? So we have all sorts of levels of precariousness. I think as the larger organizations sort of break down, spin off these multinationals, these giant multinationals, the giant firms, spin off all sorts of work into contract work. Some of that contract work you might want to be that kind of contract worker, but all are becoming more precarious. Both high skill and low skill are becoming more precarious. Right? If Google has a downturn, boom, all those people are gone. Right? They're just going to be laid off. And you can see if you're in the firm that loses to Facebook in the contest, your work has just become precarious. Now, if you have high skill levels, you're able to play in the marketplace. So I think we need to continue the precarious work, but that it's becoming more generalized is interesting. MNCs. Well, so all of the firms we're talking about go global immediately. Right? Airbnb. I mean, whatever the, Airbnb. I mean, it's in Tijuana. Not big, but it's in Tijuana. Barcelona, any of the tourist cities of Europe, it's already there. I was checking out New Delhi. They're there. They're there. Hey, and they're 5 years old. Right? So they're going, I mean, probably all firms are going global. I mean, machinery, etc. But these firms go global immediately. Why wouldn't they? You know, or Uber, order a taxi, a car in London. Wow, I mean, all it is digits in the sky, in the cloud. Right? So, the function of the MNC, well, I don't know. These are all MNCs from their inception. Basically, you put the website up and you're an MNC. Right? So, you asked a question about Huawei, which kind of links back to who owns the technology question. Well, what's interesting about this technology is a lot of it's actually not owned, the technology itself, putting the website together. Much of this stuff is open source. So these firms are initially built on open source. Now the data they collect, the database, the way they put it together, of course, that's theirs. Right? So could a couple hotshot Mexican kids in Mexico City or somewhere who figure out a good application. Could they put it up and could it go viral? Yeah. I mean, Finland, Rovio, which is Angry Birds, right? Supercell, which is some guy's games. And these went viral out of Helsinki. It's not the same as Mexico City in terms of wealth, etc. But, I mean, it went global. Right? It goes global, you can't do it in Spanish initially, got to do it in English. And then obviously all of them now are Spanish or any of the major languages, because translation, as Google Translate has showed us, is pretty good, right? Remember, we have digitized translating. I got an email from someone in Italy by mistake. It was a kind of a funny story. I couldn't read the Italian. I just put it in Google Translate, and then I understood exactly what they were writing, right, about me as an editor. But then they sent, instead of sending it to the co-authors, they sent it to me. But I didn't understand it until I put it into Google Translate. But the point is that that's also going on. That's part of this machine world that we're in. Google Translate will take your Spanish and translate it in Turkish. It's not just English anymore. That's another part of this kind of world that we're looking at. What does that mean? So Silicon Valley and a few places, London, to some degree now Helsinki, are centers of this activity. Could it happen among a group of Mexicans? Sure. And they could become billionaires, as a couple of the guys in Helsinki have, which really fascinating, because Finland thinks all the time about income distribution. Now they just have some near billionaires like that. So what I don't know, but I think it's just an absolutely interesting question. Huawei is providing a commodity servers. I don't think either Huawei or Cisco in that sense are really very interesting, but Huawei is growing very rapidly. Now the Chinese government can listen to you instead of just the American government. So people who own the technology, I think it's not the technology, I think it's the data. It's the data. The technology, a lot of this stuff is commodity technology. Obviously, when we get to the size of Google, it's no longer commodity technology. Google Translate is not a commodity technology. It's a really, I mean, if you use Microsoft Translate versus Google Translate, no brainer. But the technology is pretty much available at its initial stage. Put your website together, get going globally, because it's open source. And server farms, you can rent server space on Amazon or a set of competitors. So as you're growing, I mean, when you get to the size of Facebook, then it's no longer commodity technology, it's internally developed, sophisticated technology. Let's see, Huawei, the people in the technology, the rest of the world. So, but there is an imperialism part of this, because most of this is coming out of Silicon Valley. But the laborers are global laborers. I mean, they're Indians and Chinese and Mexicans, whoever is the best programmer who went through the best programming school. Either it would be, Stanford, the American schools, Waterloo in Canada, Cambridge in England. Doesn't matter ethnicity-wise, right? But it is the power of this data makes in some ways a new imperialism. That Google knows as much about you a Mexican as knows about me is really quite interesting. And the Mexican government knows less about you than Google does, right? This is really interesting. And Google knows more about me than probably the American. Well, it's hard to say what the American government and Google is, what the differences are, but that's a different story. So work psychology, it's really a fascinating question to think about. Well, what does it mean as workers are more and more placed in this space and are precarious contract workers, even high-end contract workers? What does that mean for your relationships to co-workers who are now often global, or sometimes global. All of these small firms, Uber, Airbnb, their programming was not just in the United States. They got programmers wherever they were. Low-end programmers in India, high-end German programmer for this particular interface, etc. Russians, getting them out of Ukraine, getting them out of St. Petersburg or Moscow. So these are global productions that you're seeing. But your co-workers are everywhere. Well, there's some work going on about this, in business schools about this kind. What is the nature of this kind of work at the micro level, which sort of psychology, sociology. I know some of that literature, but I don't follow it probably as much as I should. But there's work going on. But yeah, that's an interesting question. That I think we don't know yet how that's going to play itself out. Okay. So then there's the workers had to create a revolution, your industrial revolution sort of question, for benefits, and they had no security. I would just put a question mark calling, is this a new putting out system? Not the old putting out system that the factory got rid of when they integrated them in to control the workers, but a new putting out where I control you through cyber watching you, because I know your keystrokes and everything, and I know the work you've done, right? And so, but it's in your own home. I have no relationship to you except as a contractor. Kind of a putting out. You're doing it on your computer with your internet access, which basically now is trivial. I mean, most Mexicans, I would say 50% of Mexicans probably could, if they wanted to, have an adequate PC and an internet connection. Is that a fair characterization? So they could be in this economy, potentially. Okay, so this is really a fundamental question, is if we're in a winner-take-all economy, if capital gains are how the winners are going to capture the benefits, what about the rest of the society? How are they going to be treated? Are they going to be like Robert Reich's book, I think it was The Face of a New America, whatever it is, where he talked about symbolic analysts and gated communities? So will these people move into gated communities? But like 1990, I think it was, if you want, versus creative class and all of that, I'll take the old Robert Reich argument more. But who are they attached to? Who do they care about? Why should these people care at all about the rest of the Americans? Why should they care? There's no reason to care anymore. And it's becoming more so, I would argue. San Francisco is going to get rid of all the poor people. That's what's on the agenda. I mean, who knows? It's cyclical. Maybe this bubble will pop, and then San Francisco will become more normal. But the Google bus story is a story about removing the poor from San Francisco completely, once and for all, making it into a big gated community. I'm being kind of a little bit facetious here. So yeah, there's going to have to take a social change to demand a share of this pie, because remember, the interesting thing about the data that Google collects, the data that Facebook has, the data that LinkedIn has, is created by us. Right? Google is looking at your digital exhaust. What do you click through? What do you click on? You create that. Not Google. It's exhaust of you moving through cyberspace, and the exhaust is what they're using. Facebook is your pictures are on Facebook. Your stuff is on Facebook. Your biography is on LinkedIn. Who you connect to is your... So it's a platform where you're contributing in. You're creating the value. We are creating the value. But somebody else is capturing it. So this is almost like women's work, right? When women weren't paid in the household, raised children, yada, 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 unpaid. In a way, we're all doing women's work now because that's the value, right? I mean, in trade, we get to use Google, but our exhaust is the value that they're capturing. So let's see, communities. You know, I don't know very much about virtual communities and platforms creating. I know I'm in a community development department, but I study the leading edge of capitalism. You know, the community, yeah. So clearly, platforms can create communities, and there's a literature that I'm not familiar with on virtual communities. How do they work? What's the reality of them as far as real communitarianism? But you could also say, in a sense, that the platforms being created here are kind of like communities, but they're privately owned communities. You could also see them as markets, as resemblance.
Yes, because I think that maybe the platforms are not new. I mean, are a new kind of brokers, I think. Because I think, for example, when in the early of 20th century here in Tijuana, many investors come from San Francisco or Los Angeles, and many of them never live here. Only they put the money with the other person, and this person come to Tijuana and find other investors, and they were brokers. When I read your paper, I think in this kind of platforms like a new kind of brokers. I don't know, maybe it's related with that you say.
So there's a literature on thinking about platforms as like brokers. So the New York Stock Exchange is a platform. There are brokers on it, but the platform is where people come together. There's a whole set of modelers now thinking about two-sided platforms, through multi-sided platforms, so people from different ways come in and trade things on the platform. So yes, I think brokers is another way to think about this, because these are metaphors. A platform's a metaphor. A broker, for what we're looking at, is a metaphor, and each metaphor would give us different ways of trying to understand the phenomena. None of the metaphors are perfect. We push them too far and then collapse. So there is a discussion about some of this as brokerage. And in a sense, Airbnb and Uber have aspects of a brokerage. And they, so in the same way they collect money. The platform literature is the way people are conceptualizing it now. Broker literature on these kinds of things is a little bit older and is not used as much, but I think that's a perfectly reasonable metaphor. But they're interesting because people can come in from all over the world, right? And they can come in like that. Whereas if you go to the New York Stock Exchange, you go through a broker who handles your relationship. So yeah, I think it's a good metaphor.
Okay, we have another round. Alfredo, ready? Rocío and Oscar.
I the last one because.
Okay.
Yes.
Ready, Rocío y Oscar.
Bueno, o sea, quiero hacer una pregunta, que la realidad uno no debe empezar disculpándose, pero yo sí me quiero disculpar por mi pésimo entendimiento del inglés. Y es probable, y no estoy seguro si ya la respondió. Entonces, por eso me disculpo. De mi entendimiento del inglés. El asunto es el siguiente, o sea, aquí hay más preguntas que respuestas, y es lógico porque son fenómenos relativamente recientes que todavía están por mostrar todas sus características. Cuando se habla de la relación, o sea, del trabajo en un mundo en donde estas tecnologías están tan desarrolladas, obviamente un lado del abordaje sería el trabajo desde el punto de vista de los creadores de esa tecnología.
Hasta ahí. Que luego ya no te sigo el rollo. Y le pasa como con Enrique que no entendí nada.
¿Cómo es?
Le va a traducir esto y luego sigue.
Para una parte de tu
Va a
ponencia.
traducir. Okay. First of all, he's saying that maybe you have already answered some of his some or part of his questions, because his understanding of English is a little less than great. And he's saying that there are more questions and answers when you are talking about work in a world where these technologies are being developed. And he's saying that one perspective on this issue is the perspective of people developing those technologies. Ahora sí, síguele.
O sea, el trabajo desde el lado de la creación de la tecnología, y otra cosa es de los usuarios que usan esa tecnología, o el trabajo desde la perspectiva de los usuarios que se crean esa tecnología. Me refiero a lo siguiente, o sea, y es lo que he oído decir. Tengo una hija que se dedica ya profesionalmente a la música, y me ha hablado de que hay todo un movimiento de trabajadores independientes, y son trabajadores, o sea, pueden ser trabajadores independientes gracias a la existencia, por ejemplo, de una plataforma como Facebook, desde la cual hacen difusión a sus productos. O sea, no solamente pueden crear sus productos gracias a que se han digitalizado los contenidos. Déjame terminar la idea y después, si quieres, le transmites la idea o te la repito. O sea, y las plataformas de relaciones, es decir, puede difundir sus productos, mantiene relaciones o ha creado, gracias a esa plataforma, relaciones con proveedores, da atención directa a sus clientes, es decir, a la gente que le compra los discos, etc. El punto es que gracias a esas tecnologías se ha desarrollado una capa de trabajadores independientes, gracias a ella. El punto es que esa sería otra perspectiva desde las cuales ver el trabajo en un mundo dominado por estas tecnologías.
And the other part of this technologies is what other creators are doing with the technologies. His daughter is a singer, and thanks to Facebook and other technologies, she's able to put up her work and contact directly with clients, providers, and all sorts of people. And she claims that without this technology, she wouldn't be able to perform all these things. So he's talking about more independent workers because of this technology, especially creators.
Ese es el punto.
Rocío, por favor.
Gracias. Dr. Kenney, I want to ask you if, I don't know if you can try to have an idea, if we try to summarize or try to identify which is the main component or the main element on these changes in social relation. Is it the technology by itself, or is the effects that that can create in the relationship between labor and capital? I think that this is important in order to see if what is the more transcendent change, technology or social relation, because like you say, it has a lot of impact in productive relation also.
Oscar.
Martin, thank you very much for your very interesting presentation. I think from our comments and questions, it's clear that some of us are not really working on these topics, but anyway, it's very interesting for anyone studying capital or labor to be aware of these new trends in the IT economy. But let me just, it's a couple of questions, putting some skepticism on your argument. In the paper you circulated for us, you say that there is I think it's the computing power, explosion of data, and the app economy is creating a new paradigm. You says it's a new paradigm. And my question is this really a new paradigm? Castell's book has been for how long? 20 something years. He says this is an informational society or network society, and I'm afraid most of your of the I mean, you are talking about some kind of profundization, extension of the trends that Castells mentioned in their network society. Obviously, there is new technologies coming, and but the hyper connected society, the new ways of new companies being created, and new kinds of transactions, economic and social transactions, I would say it's more or less the same as Castells conceptualized using that concept, those concepts. So my question is, in what sense you would say this is a new paradigm, economic or yes, a new economic paradigm or social paradigm, different from the Castells model. And the other part is, I think these new trends are very, very interesting. All of us have some insight, or some experience with these kind of trends. But it seems to me like a very, very American model of socio-economic transformation. You said, what happens if someone if you are in your hotel and there is a robbery there, the police will come? No. I think in Mexico the police will commit the robbery. And what the drones delivering the mail? We are still fighting for the mail to be delivered anyway. It takes 2 months for a letter to get into your. So a drone delivering our mail. So this is a very important technological trend based on very specific institutional framework, social and institutional framework. And this is, I would say, it's fundamental for these technologies to really get embedded in the society, to have some kind of institutional support on this type. And yes, there is the young people hyper connected and offering their jobs, their skills, their products, their art through the network, using all these devices, but it is maybe just a fraction of just a sector of society, of hyper-connected society, which maybe creates a new divide, a new social divide into the developing economies, very different from the US and some other highly developed economies. So this is two kind of reflections that I have from your very, very interesting and enjoyable paper.
Thank you, Oscar. We have a question from the cyberspace. Luz Elena Salgado asked about your opinion of international indicators of capabilities or skills in indexes like International Telecommunication Union, ICT development.
So I'm going to answer, or?
Yes, Alfredo asked the last.
I just want to ask you, I don't see very clearly what kind of level of analysis you want to develop in this work, because one option could be trying to theorize about in a very wide framework like Castells, etc., what kind of society is appearing with these technologies, but you have also another possibilities. You can analyze work in a micro level perspective, in a day-to-day and the day-to-day activities of workers in this new society, IT society, or you can analyze these kind of things in a organizational level. So I wonder if you are thinking in the very, very wide perspective, on the micro perspective, of if you want to combine all of them, because this has many implications of the methodology you have or you would develop. I think this is for me it's not very clear for the moment.
Nobody asked. Okay, no question. No.
Okay. So, sorry, I'm looking at my notes here. I'm trying to.
Excuse me for the insistence.
Yeah, sorry. Let me start with addressing Oscar, which will bring me to, I think, to Alfredo. So Castells certainly gave us a set of observations, perhaps a theory about the network or the informational society. But I don't think he really told us a lot about any of the implications and how it was going to come about. That was all sort of vague. He didn't tell us really that it was going to be actualized in the Google type of small firms. I mean, he was sitting in Silicon Valley. He was at Berkeley at the time, right? He was sitting very close by to where this was gestating. And he saw the internet and he sort of argued about, well, the internet will all be networked. But he certainly didn't talk about platforms, control, power in this system, who was going to benefit, who was going to lose, how would work be reorganized. I don't read that so much in his work. I see it in some sense, we can go back even further. And certainly he wasn't the first person to start to talk about networks growing, the electronic networks, informational networks, right? And that comes out of Reinhardt and people earlier. So he's carrying that trend forward. I think this is taking it beyond that and trying to think about, well, what does this really mean into how things are going to be organized? So I think Castells would be another one along in this line of people that have talked about information and networks. But is this a North American phenomenon? A U.S. phenomenon? There are more people connected to the internet in China now than in the United States. And it probably has not quite as active, let's say, at the real cutting edge of where these technologies are going, but China is really a player. All of Northern Europe are players. I hear stories in Kenya. Kenya is becoming one of the centers of new startups in Africa, right? Mobile payments using mobile phone. Kenya is moving very quickly using Chinese-made Shanzai Android phones. Okay. So is it a Silicon Valley, California, Northern California phenomenon? I would say that in the same way as Gramsci went to Detroit, he didn't go to Manchester at the time, and he didn't go to California. He went to Detroit. Not that mass production, that the Germans weren't already experimenting with it, they were. We have Siemens and later Volkswagen, etc. So I don't think that it's purely a U.S. phenomenon. It was just a U.S. phenomenon. I don't know who really cares. I mean, in a sense. But the second largest investment of venture capital in the world, and a lot of it's in the IT space, is in Beijing. Israel would be another. So there are core centers of this. Helsinki's becoming one, but they're peripheral compared to the valley. So my guess is that you could find people like this, a community of these people in Mexico City. Probably. Certainly you could find them in Sao Paulo, but again, at the scale, and are they setting a globally dominant paradigm? I don't know. But some of the most wealthy people in China, a lot of wealthy people from the industrial side, are actually internet entrepreneurs. Robin Lee, etc. So I think it's good to be skeptical, right? But it may be that this is going to affect Mexico more than you think. Maybe not, I don't know. International capabilities in ICT development. I haven't looked at those kind of national indicators, so I don't really know. Perhaps, there's different levels of technology here. Apps technology is not the same as the heavy-duty big data software analysis technology. So it may be that there are different levels. So I don't know much about that. Okay. Trying to theorize. This is a great question. I'm not going to do the micro level. That's for sure. It's not going to do that. There's some done in that. I think that's a great place for anthropologists, people in the cultural studies space, to actually make concrete contributions. So as I've been thinking about this, what I read is not so much the anthropology, but some of the people in the cultural studies space who've done, it's not as academically rigorous as what the anthropologists have done. It's a little more, I see somebody doing this, but I think some of the most interesting stuff at the micro level that then tries to generalize up to the macro level, but in a different way than I would be doing it, is from a set of people in the cultural studies place, NYU. There's some people at UCSD that are doing work along this area. I'm not going to do that, for sure, right? I come at this from a more of a top-down, very interested in the micro, but not going to do that research. And structural, and basically, since I do so much work on venture capital, I've done a lot of work-related stuff before, as you know, in the Maquilas and in the Japanese, but that's not what I'm going to do this time. So it'll be more at the organizational level / societal level. I'm trying to understand it in that way. I haven't figured out exactly what I'm going to do. I've just been looking at this and talking with people about it and saying, I think there's something here, what is it? And you could argue, well, you have to understand at the micro level, but you might also be able to understand at the organizational level. What are these organizations doing? What are they actualizing? What are they pulling together as an organization? Then, it'd be great to have people inside Google understanding how Google does its work, or in this contingent area. So that's where I'm going to position myself, but I haven't figured out exactly what to do there. Okay, identify the main component, effects in the relationship between labor and capital. I mean, what's interesting here, it's the relationship between labor and capital, but, as you put things on Facebook, you're creating value. I wouldn't call it labor, you're not compensated for it, but you're actually creating value for Facebook. So what's the nature of labor here? I mean, some of it we understand. It's a contract, right? You get a wage, or you're my employee wage, or it's a contract. You provide me a service that I pay for is the one-off. That's a piece of the labor here. But when she's working on Facebook and putting her daughter's pictures up on Facebook, she's actually doing labor. We wouldn't think of it that way before, but somebody will be compensated for it. It wasn't like woman's work, cooking, where nobody's exactly compensated there. Somebody's going to make money off your micro contribution that you're doing because you want to communicate with your friends. So it's kind of interesting how parts of what we do that are consumption or not labor in the sense of compensated become directly valuable. And this was already occurred, of course, with advertising and the television, CBS, and then they would sell you advertising, which is part of what Facebook does. But I think it's more than that. So it's like, I was just reading something, 50% of young people check their smartphone every 10 minutes, right, or something like that, right? I was going, oh, geez, what does all that mean? I mean, it used to be check emails, but smartphones become so the society itself capitalism is putting its fingers deeper into that, I think, in some way that we don't understand, and converting things like Martin responding and putting Oscar on his LinkedIn now has value. When before I said to, hey Joe, you ought to talk to Oscar, there was no value there, if you see what I'm getting at. Now, that actually has a micro value. Very, very little. But aggregated at the level of 10 billion, or whatever number it is, connections that come. Now, that's real money. So that's, I think, also kind of interesting here. So parts of the world, and we've seen this progressively, right? McDonald's started to do work that mommy did. She cooked the hamburger, right? Or now McDonald's cooks the hamburger and serves it, right? Which took that piece and moved it out of the non-capitalist world into the capitalist world. Now this is taking all these other little pieces and kind of moving them out of the non-capitalist world, aggregating them, making you able to do things that you never could before. So your daughter is really an incredibly powerful observation. Your daughter, the singer, now is able to access people around the world for her vocal capabilities or something. So Facebook added something to her, but did it in a private way rather than, Oscar saying, well, I know his daughter's a great singer and getting her a gig in a club downtown if she's a jazz singer or something. If you see what so that's really another part of this. So it's as Mark said, capitalism would do, it's increasing our length, our ability, our capabilities to reach out and become more powerful. She's more powerful by using Facebook. But simultaneously now that is being integrated in to Facebook's money-making operation. I think that's what's so interesting and cool about this is you can take it at every level. And it is repetition. This has happened before. This is not new, but it's a rhyme, not a repetition. Rhymes with things that happened in the past.
Sorry, just a brief. Following that argument, would you say that not only labor is creating value, but maybe other kind of activities, not only work creates value? So this is a completely different argument from the Marxist argument on the labor value link.
Because isn't that factual?
So say that again. Say it again.
Okay.
Yes.
Well, not only labor creates value, not only work. As I mean that's what I would say from your own argument, and that would be very different from the Marxist argument of labor creating value.
But it's not that kind of work.
I'm asking to, because this is, that would be my conclusion by reading and listening to Martin's argument.
So
because you are calling work to put the pictures on Facebook, but maybe it's not work, it's other kind of activity creating.
well, it's consumption side, really.
Yes. Yeah.
It's consumption side. This is, you're doing this for play, for fun, right? It's consumption side, but it's transformed into value by the machine.
Yes.
But it's human, it is human labor activity. She's expending mind and some physical.
It's not the classic factory.
No, it's, of course, so the factories, this is exploding the factory. I mean, the factory's still around here and there, but that's not where, I mean, there's value created in factories, but increasingly it's outside the factory. But it's this consumption side. So there's another piece of this. So there are many pieces. There's a work side of this, but there's also this consumption side that is creating value.
What I don't see is why you should call that labor. It's not make much sense.
I think the interesting thing is how
The
how
microphone.
the same people how people changes their role in the productive activity. When you were putting the example of the car, you have a car, you have a good, and you are a user, but suddenly you can add value to your account, renting the car, putting the car in a productive activity. So the changes are very quick, and the technology is the tool which allows to make these changes. I think this is an interesting argument.
Jorge, I'm ready and finish.
Well, I think it's an interesting debate. If the new type of services and specifically the new type of activities are work or not. I mean, in the sense that we know. I more agree with you in terms that if we want to compare with formal and contractual type of activity or labor, then of course this is not. But the issue is not the work itself, but the issue is if it's generating value or not. So then it's another story, and of course most of the human activity could be or not generating value for others or for myself. So that's the main transformation. In that sense, I totally agree.
Yeah, I agree. Ready and Rocío and now finish.
No, muy rápido, o sea, para tratar de poner más bronca en toda esta confusión, es que, por ejemplo, yo veo estos consumidores que se convierten en trabajadores independientes, también como empresarios, que logran convertirse en empresarios gracias a esta tecnología que les permite hacerlo prácticamente, y volviendo a la teoría marxista, sin un capital original, pues no tiene nada.
He says that it's very interesting to see these consumers who all of a sudden can become entrepreneurs. And without the technology, that would not be possible. Without the capital.
Entrepreneurs, another big debate. Rocío, please.
Yeah, because this discussion, I told before, or I asked it about what is the main component or what is the main effect of this technological change. Because I agree with you that it is a creation of value, but not also creation of value, but the way in which the value is created. And you have now like the creativity is for free for the capital in many ways, yeah, because the capital extract and take for the internet or for these platforms a lot of information that can convert or can create value. And I agree with you about the contribution of Castells. Castells show what was happening. It was at the beginning of the big change, but probably nobody could really to think about the big transformation in the society and the social relations.
Okay. Can you
Well, so to these are observations. These are not questions. I think these are really powerful and interesting observations. That's why I think I'm very happy that I had an opportunity to come here, because, we don't, in my department, we don't talk about this quite as much. But your point about this creation of value is really interesting, because how you or I playing on Facebook gets transformed into value. I mean, I think you're right. It's your creativity on Facebook or whatever, but it's partly your creativity. On LinkedIn, it's not so much creativity; it's just contributing information. Then gets transformed to value for someone else. I'm sure this has happened in other times in capitalism, but I'm not sure it's been done on this scale. And the other thing is the granularity. His daughter, I mean, this is very granular. You can get your daughter and your son and get a little bit from all of them just telling about what they're doing. In a sense, they're entrepreneurs, right? Uber, Airbnb says you're an entrepreneur. It's your room, you're renting it out. Uber, it's your car. You're now an entrepreneur. But are you an entrepreneur in the same way as the Facebook guy is an entrepreneur, or the LinkedIn founder? Maybe. Uber argues that all of their car drivers are entrepreneurs. We're creating entrepreneurs out of all of you, right? And in a sense, they're kind of right. But in a way, you're just kind of not an employee, but because you're not an employee, you're a contributor to them. Your daughter's a contributor. She wouldn't do it if she didn't get anything, right? I put pictures of my children on Facebook. Well, I'm a contributor. I get something out of it. So, and in your daughter's case, she gets some money, I assume. So that's what makes it so head-scratching as to what's really happening here. And I don't think Castell saw that in his work. I just don't see it there. I think Rich Ford is trying to capture a little of this in his creative class, which is now a concept 6-7 years old, and it's not based on the technological change. Though I think he didn't see that, and it's not my job to tell Rich how to make money, because he makes a lot more than me, and give new ideas to him. But and the cognitive, and that's when Alan adds the cognitive class. I think there he's thinking more of the technical workers. So yeah, I don't know what to think here, but I think you've pushed me in ways that I need to think about this, so I have to thank you for pushing me, because I think this is a really interesting area that we need to know more about as social scientists, because it's going to change who we are and who our children are, absolutely, for sure. Hands down. We know that.
Okay. Well, thank you, Martin, Kenney. We appreciate this moment for the reflection, and maybe we can, in the future, in the next months, we continue the discussion.
Sure.
Maybe
Absolutely.
could be interesting. And let me a moment, please.
Recuerden que vamos a tener mínimo 4, tal vez 5 sesiones más en los próximos meses. Les anunciaremos el programa oportunamente para que ojalá que sigan interesados. Son diferentes tópicos, pero siempre tan interesantes como sabe hacerlo Martin. Entonces les estaremos distribuyendo la información oportunamente.
None of them will be as interesting as this. There'll be more head-down kind of little topics.
Así entiendes, gracias.
Pues muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Thank all of you for great questions.